Lately, I've been thinking all about the different ways that games make money. So all the different ways games make income, because obviously that's kind of the point of a game. While it's nice to think about the artistic merit of games and how much fun they are for everybody and all of that sort of stuff, the people who make them need to get paid. Like, that's an important part of the whole kind of equation. And in this video, I'm going to talk about all the different ways games make money and the different ways I think different kinds of games should make money. And I'm trying to argue it out, try to articulate it as best I can, why some models are worse than others. Now, this isn't in reaction to any one particular thing. Like, obviously there has been a lot of stuff going on lately, like Gran Turismo 7 changing the way their currency system works, like maybe encouraging you to buy microtransactions instead. People have been talking about the Hogwarts Legacy reveal, where it kind of looked like there were some real life timers going on when you were brewing potions, and people thought that that might lead to microtransactions, although the game director said absolutely not, there are no microtransactions in that game. And obviously people are always talking about things like Call of Duty and all of its cosmetics, or Destiny having like expansions and then a battle pass and then cosmetics on top of that, or Lost Ark being like free to play but then having tons of like extra little paid boosts and things like that. It's an interesting problem, and I think there's lots of kind of misunderstanding about why some things work well and why some things might not work well. So that's what we're going to talk about in this video. Probably going to be quite a long one, so maybe get yourself a cup of tea or something, have a seat, get comfy, and let's get into it. So I'm going to split this video up into 3 different sections because I think they all have very, very different requirements. So I'm going to talk about single player games first of all. So games like The Last of Us, or games like Red Dead Redemption 2, ignoring Red Dead Online, or even simpler games than that, games like Tunic that just came out. So games where you are playing them entirely single player, you are not going to interact with another player at any point while you're doing it. Then we're going to talk about PVE games, so like co-op games. So really here I'm thinking about games like Destiny, ignoring Crucible and Gambit, or games like The Division, or games even like Lost Ark, again ignoring the PvP side of it. Borderlands, stuff like that. Games where you are playing with your friends and you are progressing, maybe you have a character that you're leveling up and stuff like that. Those sort of games. Diablo, for example, Diablo 3. And then finally we'll talk about PvP games. Now the reason I'm doing them in this order is because I think the restrictions on how games need to be funded get stricter as you move towards PvP. Like once you get to competitive games, there you've got loads of problems that the other types of games just don't have. Loads of things that they can get away with that PvP games really, really struggle with. So that's why we're going to kind of move towards a strict trend. So anyway, let's start with single player games. Let's start with those sort of single player games that are, you know, I would assume the standard, the sort of old fashioned type of games. So I think most people would agree the best way to do this is just to have a full priced game. That's the kind of norm. That seems to make people quite happy. You pay one price at the beginning and you get everything included in that game. Now, the price of the games is really difficult. Like, it got really expensive in like the 90s. I remember my parents paying like 70 quid for Starwing, or Star Fox if you're in the US, because it had, you know, some special chip on the cartridge and stuff like that. And then the kind of price went down a little bit and stagnated for about 20 years. And now they're increasing again. So some new PlayStation 5 games are £70. I think Gran Turismo was. I think they were trying to charge that for Horizon, but you could get a free upgrade from the previous one. Returnal was super expensive. So this seems to be the kind of new price, is £60 to £70, which I'm guessing is probably like $70 or $80. I'm not really sure because of the tax thing they do in America, but that's how it seems to work. And most people seem to agree this is kind of fair. But obviously it does have some big problems. The big one being, you've got questions about, is a game worth it if you complete it in 5 hours and you just paid £70 for it? Are many people going to try out a game if the game is £70? For games that know that they have an audience, so like the next God of War game, or the next Grand Theft Auto game, or the next Last of Us, or something like that, they know they can slap a £70 price tag on it and it will sell well. They will be one of the best selling games of that month. They'll never do as well as a game like FIFA or Madden or NBA or Call of Duty or anything like that, but they will have success. They will get their money back by putting that price tag on. Where it gets much more difficult is for those smaller games. Games like Tunic, games that have a new IP, maybe something really innovative, maybe a new game genre even, something from a new studio that people haven't heard of before. They can't put 70 quid price tags on their game. And their games might not have cost as much to make, but you don't know, maybe they have. Games as an element is very, very difficult. You know, sometimes if a game gets delayed, people always talk about game delays as if it only affects the end user. But say if a game gets delayed for a year, you know, something like Lego Star Wars or something like that, you're now paying everyone who works at that company a whole extra year's worth of wages before the game isn't going to make any money. Like, that's huge. That's a huge extra cost. So when you see these kind of fairly small development studios or new small development studios delaying a game or working on one game for 5 or 6 years, that's an insane thing to try and fund. That's an insane thing to keep on going, that they have to keep paying all of these people before they've even sold a game. And obviously that's where investors and things like that come in. So they have a much harder time selling a box game. But there's other ways people can make money. So one of the things they do is pre-order bonuses. And this is something that I didn't used to care about and I increasingly don't like. So when I'm talking about pre-order bonuses, I'm talking about in-game things. So, you know, if you buy a Ubisoft game and you pre-order it, you'll almost definitely get an extra item at the beginning. You'll maybe get some in-game currency. You'll maybe get a few skins and things like that. And sometimes you'll even get early access to the game. So you'll get to play the game 3 days early, for example. I know like the Forza games do that and stuff. I know they're not just single-player games, but bear with me. So sometimes you'll get these pre-order bonuses. Now, the really like tricky thing that's going on with the language of these is that these aren't actually bonuses. These are things that are in the game. They're in everybody's copy of the game, and they're just being taken away for people who don't buy the pre-order. So they're things that are in the game and they have been removed from people who don't have that license on their account, people who didn't buy the pre-order. Similarly, if the game is, you know, coming out 3 days early for collector's edition owners or whatever, it's not. It's coming out 3 days later for everyone else, because the day when it releases for the early people, that's when the game is ready, that's when the game is good to go, good to launch, and they've just delayed it for people who are willing to pay a little bit less money. Now, all of this annoys me because essentially what they're doing is making the game a little bit worse, in theory, for the people who are just buying the standard edition. Assuming that those pre-order bonuses are things that make the game more fun, assuming they're things that make the game better, then all they're doing is making the game a little bit worse for the majority of people who don't pre-order or who don't buy the fancy edition of it. Sometimes games actually do it the other way around, where they release pre-order bonuses that make the game worse. And Ubisoft have been guilty of this in the past. I've played a bunch of different games where you get some sort of special weapon as part of your pre-order bonus, and then you end up using that for like the first 10 hours of the game. And it means that you completely ignore the whole sort of like, you know, power curve of starting off weak and getting stronger. You don't worry about all of the loot that drops for like the first 10 hours because you're just using this one thing all of the time, and that's kind of tedious. That definitely happened with Assassin's Creed. I think it was Odyssey. It was either Odyssey or Origins, though you got some weapon early on that had like a poison effect with it, when if you were playing the normal game you wouldn't get a fancy weapon that did stuff like that until way later in the game. But because you had it, it just made all of the early fights super easy. So the pre-order bonuses actually made the game worse. I would much rather if the people who design the games design the game around what was the most fun. And if they're designing around what made the most fun for everyone, it doesn't matter about like, oh, well, so we want to incentivize some people to pay a bit more money to get this or anything like that. They're just going to try and make it as good as it can be. So I think pre-order bonuses like that are quite bad. One place where I do think that they can do well with pre-order bonuses or collect editions, things like that, is physical merch. Because if you have physical merch for a pre-order bonus or a collect edition, like, you know, a statue or a t-shirt or a hoodie or something or a poster or whatever it is, that's something that doesn't affect the game in any way. People who want to buy that, people who are super into the lore of the game and the world of the game and all of that kind of stuff, they will buy that and they will get something else, you know, in the real world. Good for them, happy for them, everyone wins because people get more money. People who don't care about that physical merch won't buy that and will just buy the standard edition, but everyone will end up with the same game. So I think that's the way to go for most games, is one price, you buy the game, and if you want to have like extra editions, if you want to raise a bit more money with things like pre-orders, collected editions, sell something physical. Just sell something that people can actually own. Now, like I was saying, those games like Tunic or those games from smaller studios, it gets a bit trickier because I'm probably not going to pay £70 for a game from a studio that I've never heard of if it's an IP that I've never heard of that, you know, looks very, very untested. It looks like something a bit different. So what can they do? I think the answer is things like Game Pass. Things like Game Pass are brilliant for this. You know, Tunic is on Game Pass and that's amazing because I never would have bought that game. The art style didn't really appeal to me, but I'll I'll try it because I already have a subscription to Game Pass, so why not? And from the developer's point of view, obviously they reach a deal with Microsoft and they say, okay, you give us this amount of money and you can have the game on your service. And then the pressure's off them a little bit. All they need to do is make a game that tries to get good word of mouth, that looks fun, that is a fun thing to try out. They're actually rewarded for doing something a bit different, something that would stand out from the rest of the catalogue on Game Pass, because that's in Microsoft's best interest. They want as broader types of games as possible on Game Pass. So they're going to be looking for things that are different. They're going to be looking for things that are innovative and creative. So this works out really, really well for the developer because they don't have to worry about, exactly when their game's coming out and sales and what price to set it at and all stuff like that. They already know how much money they're going to get. And then from Microsoft's point of view, it works out well for them because obviously they can get more games on their service. And then for the consumer, it works out well because you can try this game without paying any extra money if you already have that service, and you're more likely to get sort of creative and different and innovative games. So I feel like for smaller games or for small studios or new studios or new types of games, Game Pass is the way to go. For more established games, just paying a fixed price is probably the way to go. Let's move on to PVE games. So we're talking about games like The Division here, games like Destiny, games like Diablo, stuff like that. A fixed price doesn't work so well for these sort of games. And my thinking for that is, first of all, if I see a game that I'm really excited about, so I see a new game, say the new Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, although I'm not that excited about it, but assuming I was, I'm going to play Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, I want to play it co-op because that's what the game seems to be based around. If I have to pay £70 for that game, that's a pretty tough pill to swallow. Me trying to convince 3 of my friends to also pay 70 quid to play that game, it's probably not going to happen. I have a group of friends that I play a lot with, so you might see them on the streams like Name Gear and The Arrow and 50 Foot Snail and Emil. We play a lot of those games, and if a new game comes out, I've always got a little bit of a kind of discussion to have. I've got a job of trying to convince them that it's worth them buying it and us playing it. Bearing in mind, at that point, we probably don't know if we're going to enjoy it. We don't know if it's going to be good. We don't know how it's going to go. So it's a bit of a gamble. If a game is like £10, £20, normally I can convince Name Gear and Arrow to get it, because, PC games are normally the way this goes. If it's more than that, it's incredibly difficult and none of us want to risk their money, because loads of these games end up just not being that much fun, or we don't stick with them for very long. And that's a big problem. So having a cheaper price on the games helps a lot. But then you've got obviously the problem that the developers, the studios, the publishers and all that sort of stuff are making less money. They would have to sell a huge amount more copies of the game for it to be worth it. So what they've been doing over the last, 10 years that these games have been really, really popular is they've been finding different ways to fund things. So like looking at Destiny as an example, Destiny, originally you had to buy the game. It was a full price game. Then they have full price paid expansions. Well, I say full price, they're like half the price of a normal game, but they're like full price for a co-op game. And then you have seasons, so like battle passes on top of that. And then you have microtransactions in the way of lots and lots of cosmetics and things like that. So they have loads of different funding things. And that's because these games are very expensive to make. They have ongoing development. It's not like they develop a game, then they put it out there and reap the rewards. They have ongoing development, then they become a live service in lots of cases. And so they're continuing making stuff all the time. They're continuing patching stuff, keeping the servers running, all stuff like that, which means that they need more and more income. So it's a really difficult thing to fund. Some games have done it where they've decided to not bother with the live service model at all. So like Outriders was an example where they said, yeah, this is it. Like you will buy the game at the beginning and then we are not going to support it anymore. And I don't think that game did that well, and it just kind of disappeared very quickly. Some games talk about doing live service and then just don't really, like the Avengers, where it just kind of faded away a little bit. It's a very, very difficult thing to get right. So I think, like I said at the beginning, they need a low barrier of entry. They need a low price at the beginning. Let's now look at some of the other things that Destiny does, because I think that's a good example. It's a game I know well, and talk about each thing. The Battle Pass, like Destiny Seasons, is interesting. So Destiny has a seasonal battle pass type thing where it has, levels 0 to 100 that you can work your way through. You buy one, it lasts for quite a long time. It's a lot longer than like a Call of Duty one. And you get different things as you go. So you get some resources, you get some items and things like that. You get a few cosmetics, and you get like one exotic weapon, one special weapon. The danger with these sort of things is that they are going to stretch things out over a long period of time in a way that isn't fun, but is designed to just keep you coming back. So they'll do things like saying, okay, we're going to do a daily challenge that you need to progress this, or in Destiny they do weekly challenges. You can't do them all at once. You're going to have to keep coming back every Tuesday to do a few more, or you can do some at the end. Halo Infinite's kind of tried to get around that by saying, okay, once you buy a battle pass, once you buy a seasonal pass, you then keep that forever, and you can come back and do them in whatever order you want, whenever you want. That's quite a nice idea, so it doesn't make you feel like you're sort of pressured into doing it or anything like that. And Destiny does extra stuff, you know, so there's actually story content attached to it. There's more to it than what they say. So that's one way of doing it. And it works out quite well. Like in Destiny, I never really think when I'm talking to people about whether they've got the battle pass or not, so it doesn't split up friendship groups, it doesn't split up clans or anything. It does make it feel a little bit like everything's spaced out a little bit more than it would be normally, but other than that, I think it's a pretty good model to use. Another way of doing it is microtransactions aren't cosmetic. So when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about things like experience boosters or time skips for things that take a lot of time. I don't think anyone's ever going to do pay to win, and we'll talk about that a bit more in PvP, but it's very rare that people will do something where it's like, oh, to get the best thing in the game, you need to pay money for it, because everyone knows that's the worst thing. And I almost see it as a red flag now when a developer is making a game and they say as if they're doing something really noble. They're like, well, we're never going to be pay to win. And it's like, yeah, obviously. Like, I can't think of any successful games that have been particularly pay to win. Like, that's a really rare thing because everyone agreed straight away that that was a terrible idea. So as soon as someone's saying that as if it's a brilliant thing, that's a sort of red flag of like, wait a minute, what are you going to do then? Because if that's the best you're going to do is like, you're not going to let people pay to get an advantage. There's a worry here. It's like a real concern there. But yeah, so microtransactions aren't cosmetic. The big problem with them is fairly obvious, I think. That if you're doing, say, you can buy in-game currency, like Gran Turismo 7, you can buy money in Gran Turismo 7 using real money. The incentive is for the game developer to make it so you're wanting to buy that real money. You're wanting to buy the currency with your real money, aren't you? Like, the incentive is to make it so it's a little bit frustrating if you don't spend any real money. It takes a long time. There's a grind. Make it so there are people who will not be willing to do the stuff that you have to do for free in order to earn the same thing that you could then just pay 30 quid for. And we've seen this with things like Grand Theft Auto Online, with the shark cards. We've seen it with Gran Turismo 7, where they've just nerfed the in-game payments because people realized that some races were making quite a lot of money. And they said, oh, no, we're going to take that away. And it's like, now it's almost impossible to buy a sort of collection of top-end cars in Gran Turismo because it would just take too many races, take too long. So people who will want to do that will have to spend real money to do it. So they've kind of changed the gameplay design, changed the balance of things in game in order to push people more towards these microtransactions. And it's not always about money, you know, it works with experience boosters as well. If you're selling an experience booster that doubles the rate you get XP, the incentive is going to be to slow down XP for people who don't pay, just to make them feel like there's some value in paying for it. And a lot of these things I'm going to talk about from now on, a lot of the bad things, are about creating this sense of value out of nothing. Creating a sense of value where really all you're doing is punishing the people that aren't paying up for it. And this is something that I'm really against in video games. I'm against in just in the general economy in the world. Creating artificial scarcity is a really bad model to me. It seems like something that's incredibly unethical. And when you're doing it in a video game, obviously it's not the end of the world. It's not an incredibly unethical thing to do, but it just kind of sucks if your game experience is made worse because they're trying to push you to paying a little bit of extra money. The next way of doing it is obviously microtransactions are cosmetic. So Destiny has this whole store, the Eververse, where you can buy tons of cosmetics, you can buy funny emotes, you can buy sparrows, you can buy ships, you can buy colors for your armor, you can buy ornaments that change the way your armor looks and your weapons look, all stuff like that. In a PvE game, that's pretty good, I think. That's like, it's fairly fine. Like in Destiny, it never bothers me that other people sometimes buy these things that look really cool. I might be a little bit jealous sometimes, which is obviously how they're designed, but it doesn't matter that much. There is still an obvious problem with them, that these things have been designed in the game, And in older games, in the past, you would unlock them by doing game challenges, and that's intrinsically more fun. It's a lot more fun to have like some super hard challenge that if you manage to complete this, then you get this skin. One of the last games I remember doing that really well was Blackout, actually, which I know Black Ops 4 had microtransactions, stuff like that, but they also had a set of skins. And originally they had whole operators you could unlock by doing really difficult challenges in Blackout. So it would be literally stuff like, oh, make sure you get a 200-meter headshot and then fly a helicopter around for 10 minutes and then win the game. And if you do that, you get to play as, like, I think that was like, you get to play as Woods or something like that. It was really cool. And then they changed it so there were just these really sort of trippy skins that you got from doing it that had the numbers going all over them. That was quite a cool thing. And as soon as you have a cosmetic store, instead of doing that, you're going to push those things away to being like, oh no, but we could charge someone £5 for that, or we could charge someone £20 for that. Like, think of the Warzone store. Imagine if all of the things in the Warzone store were things that you could earn through challenges. Like, how much more fun would that be? So it's a shame. And I know there's probably an argument to make that they wouldn't actually design all these cosmetics if they weren't making money from them by selling them. So it's not that like they would be in the game anyway. They probably just wouldn't exist. But it does mean that we're losing a lot of those things where completing challenges gets you cool things, which I think is a real shame. Another way of doing PvE is by having some kind of subscription model. So something like World of Warcraft, where you pay £8 a month and then you get to do all these things. Now, the big problem with this is kind of similar to the battle passes, that if you're paying monthly for something, they have an incentive to drag everything out. They have an incentive to keep you playing for as long as possible and not giving you too much to do in any given month or week or whatever the payment, like, what's the word? Cadences, whatever the payment cycle is. So they'll want to do something every month. And that kind of makes sense. The same way in Disney Plus, you pay a subscription for that. They're not releasing all of their shows in 1 month. Instead, they'll like start a show at one point in a month, and then they'll make sure it stretches out to a month and a half. So you're definitely paying 2 months just to watch that one show. And then they'll start the next show, 3 weeks later, just then you keep it going a little bit longer. They're trying to find ways to manipulate the timing so you'll keep on paying a subscription. And World of Warcraft does it, with very irregular updates, very slow updates. They're trying to find ways to make it so you will keep on playing. Now, with a PvE game where you've maybe got a story and you've got progression and stuff like that, there's lots of ways for them to manipulate you into feeling like you have to keep that subscription going or you'll fall behind. So they'll keep it very, very slow and they'll keep the progression very slow. But if you skip out on a month, then they'll make it so, they'll punish you. So they'll make it so it's harder for you to get back into it in future. And that kind of sucks. So while I'm not against subscription models in general, and I'll talk a bit more about them a little bit later in this video, that does make it very, very difficult to recommend for like a PvE game, just because I think it's going to slow everything down. Another way of doing it is obviously putting it on Game Pass. So having it in something like, Destiny was on Xbox Game Pass. I think it still is on PC, but it's going to be going in a bit with all of the expansions and everything like that. It works out really well where you can play with your friends. You can get everyone on there. The big problem with that is that it's a very sort of low income model. When I was talking earlier about these live service games needing constant income, they need constant money coming in all the time. I can't imagine they can be funded by something like Game Pass, especially these big AAA massive productions like Destiny, like Diablo. It seems crazy. I'd like to think maybe Diablo 4 will be on it because of the whole Microsoft Activision merger type thing. I'd like it if, Destiny came back to Game Pass or came onto like the PlayStation 1. As a consumer, it's absolutely amazing having stuff like that. If you get all of the stuff included in a PvE game on Game Pass, it's perfect for you. But I just can't imagine that it makes enough money. I can't imagine that it creates enough revenue to keep these games running and keep them coming out of content in the way that we would expect. There's also a little bit less incentive for the people who are making the games to create lots of good content, because if like they're just getting their paycheck from Microsoft or whatever, they're getting their Game Pass money, they don't really have a need to keep that player base up, to keep the players coming in or anything like that, or to keep people playing. So they can kind of just stop releasing content and no one will really care. So that seems like a real shame. So the way I think they should do it for PvE is with expansions. Destiny's been doing this for a while. I think it works spectacularly well, where you buy an expansion and then for the next year, year and a half, 2 years, you are going to be playing through content with that stuff. It's a bit like releasing a full price game, but you're doing it with every time you do an expansion. They could release them a long way apart, like every 2 years. They could release them much closer together if that's what they wanted to do. They could even price them like full games. It gives you as a consumer choice where you can decide, okay, with your group of friends, we're all going to get this one expansion and then we're all going to play together. That's a little bit lower barrier to entry. I really like the way Destiny did it, where the first part of it was free to play. So like you can now, it wasn't originally, but it is now, you can play like the first bit of story for free. You can play it with your friends if you want. You can get a taste of whether you like the game. And then if you want to jump into the next bit of content, you pay for that piece of content. One of the games that I think had a really, really good model for microtransactions and all stuff like that was Lord of the Rings Online, where you actually bought sort of quests, essentially. You were like, okay, I'm going to buy the Moria pack, and that's going to give me all of the missions in Moria, and then you can get all of the rewards and stuff like that by playing through it. If you don't feel like you want to play through that part of the game, you just don't buy it. And I think while there's like lots of arguments to be had about pricing, that's probably the best method I can see. It gives them an incentive to keep on making new content, keep on making new expansions, and make the expansions as exciting as possible because they want people to buy it. It means if you want to play it, you're not going to fall behind because you just didn't buy one of the expansions, because you can just skip ahead to the next one. Destiny was really good about the beginning of Witch Queen, just raised everyone's light level up, which I think was a good idea. And you can always go back to buy one of the expansions if you want to go back and play them. So I don't think it's a perfect model, but I think it's probably the best way is to do these kind of expansions. They could even combine them with something like Game Pass if they wanted, just to be able to have them like ongoing and make sure there's always some sort of new content for you to do. Now, finally, let's talk about PvP games. And this is probably the most kind of controversial one. And it's the one I imagine lots of people who watch my channels will care the most about because of things like Warzone. So for PvP games, there's lots of issues with all of the different ways that they get funded, but they have one thing that they can't really do, and that's having a price up front. It's very, very difficult to start up a new PvP game now and say to people, oh, if you want to try this game out, it's 30 quid, 50 quid, 70 quid, 10 quid even. It's very, very difficult to do that because there's so many free-to-play games about. People kind of expect it. And you want to have that population. You want to have a lot of people playing. If you have a game that's 30 quid at launch and then, I don't know, a few people buy it, it doesn't matter if like you're hoping on word of mouth, meaning more people buy it, because those few people are going to have a bad experience because there's not going to be enough people in the servers. And when I say that, I don't mean like, oh, you just need like 30 people to fill a lobby. You need enough people in every different region to make sure that matchmaking is sensible, that ping is sensible, that different skill levels are sensible. If you've ever played a game on Steam, like a multiplayer game, where there's not that many people that play it, you'll find that you'll often end up in lobbies with people who, that's the only game they play all day, every day, and they'll absolutely destroy you. And you'll end up playing with people on different continents, so the ping will be really bad. It's an absolute nightmare. So you need the server population to be incredibly high, so it basically has to be free to play. It has to be free at least the point that you're starting to play it, just to get people in the door, to get people trying it. Now, you could do things where you buy things like guns and characters and stuff like that, but then you're going back to that thing I was talking about, pay to win. And everyone knows that's a terrible thing. As soon as someone accuses your game of being pay to win, that's going to put loads of people off. There's some people who've done it in kind of what I think is quite a subtle way. So like Heroes of the Storm was a game that I played a lot of, or Rainbow Six Siege does this to an extent, where they'll let you buy operators, they'll let you buy characters or heroes to play as. And obviously their incentive is to make the new characters overpowered, because if they make them overpowered, people will buy them. More people will want to buy them to use them while they're overpowered. And I'm sure every time they do it, they say like, oh, no, it was a mistake. It's an honest mistake. But it's easy to have sort of your tinfoil hat on and think, was it really a mistake, or did you just want to make a bunch of money because you're a business and that's what you're trying to do? So I think doing anything where you're buying something that gives you an advantage in gameplay, like buying characters, is something that probably isn't the way forward. That's probably not going to work very well. You could do cosmetic items, but Warzone's brought up a really, really interesting issue with cosmetic items, that some cosmetics actually give you a gameplay advantage. So the Rose skin being a good example. Rose skin was a Battle Pass reward, and it was almost impossible to see because of the colors. Some skins have an incredible advantage over others. Some of them are very bright, very easy to spot in different landscapes, different backgrounds. Some of them are really hard to see. And if you make it so some cosmetics actually might give you a competitive advantage, it's not going to work. And that sucks. And like I said before as well, I much prefer having cosmetics or rewards for challenges and all stuff like that. So I would much rather that they had cosmetics being free and being something that's kind of fun. And then they can also, if there's a problem like the rose skin, they can take it away easily because no one's paid for it. They can change it easily because no one's going to be complaining like, hey, I bought this because it was better and now you're changing it and taking it away. I want my money back. You can have a lot more freedom. So while cosmetics have been the way that games have been doing stuff for a while, and in some games it works really well, like Fortnite, where as far as I know, there haven't been any skins that have a big competitive advantage. It's something that's difficult to balance, but it might work for some games. For other games, I think it's a very, very dangerous issue. And I would prefer it if that isn't how microtransactions worked. Another way is obviously doing things like what Midnight Society are talking about doing with their game of having NFTs. I've talked at great length about why I think this is a problem, but the biggest one is just that you're going to include a community who aren't there interested in gameplay. You're going to include a group of people who are trying to make real money. So if you make anything in your game that people can buy with real money and then potentially sell for even more money, then you've got people in there who are just seeing it as an investment. You've got people there who are speculating on it, people who are trying to work out if they can just make more money from doing this, if they can make more money by, you know, doing something in game that increases engagement or gets more people to want to buy the things off them that they bought. It makes things limited, so it goes back to that artificial scarcity I was talking about. You've turned the whole game into this weird economy that lots of people are going to be invested in, not because of the game. And I think that's super dangerous to the community, and it's not something that is a model that I'd like to see anyone ever come in. Aside from all the problems that you're also going to get lots of very stupid people or children who don't understand economics buying things, tricks into buying things because they think it's something that they're going to be able to make money on later. And while people will always point to situations and say, oh, but this person did make loads of money by buying NFTs or buying cryptocurrency or whatever it is, or buying CSGO knives, you could also point to the thousands of people that lost money or spent more money than they should have. Which, trust me, that will be a much, much bigger number. There'll be a lot of people who did it, but you have this survivorship bias where the people who make a load of money are obviously the loudest ones. They're the ones that everyone points to. And it just becomes gambling at best, or a pyramid scheme at worst, where people are buying into this system thinking they're going to get rich from it. And sometimes through bad luck, they will lose the money. And, you know, like any gambler, sometimes they will have spent money that they couldn't afford to lose. And like any pyramid scheme, the people who hold these things, who own these things, will have a real incentive to try and convince everyone else that it's valuable, to try and convince other people that they want to get involved in the system. So you end up with this weird type of shill where they're not paid by the company. Instead, they're just having this vested interest, this agenda that makes them want to constantly tell everyone why these things are so absolutely brilliant, which, you know, you obviously see a lot of in the crypto space because it's a Ponzi scheme. Then you could do things with XP boosts and stuff like that, and Warzone's done a little bit of this. I don't know if you can actually buy XP boosts, but I definitely give them away a lot. But again, like I said with the PvE one, as soon as you're selling XP boosts, you've got an incentive to make XP quite slow. You've got an incentive to slow things down for people who aren't going to pay it. So you've got an incentive to make the gameplay worse based on people who aren't buying it. So I think that's a bad idea. So to me, the way to do it, the way to kind of fix things for PvP, and this is probably the most unpopular one and the thing that people won't like, I think they should go for a subscription model. It doesn't have the same problems a subscription model for PvE does, where the content is going to be released more slowly, because in a PvP mode, you're playing the game for like the actual joy of the game, for the competition, for stuff like that. You're playing the game to play against other people, so you don't care about like the story coming out and stuff like that, or probably. So I think a subscription model could work quite well. That if you want to play Warzone, you start paying £10 a month to play Warzone. And bear in mind, I'm saying this is instead of all of the other models. So now you're paying that £10 a month, you're getting free cosmetics and operators and all stuff like that. All of that stuff could be locked behind things like challenges and just fun stuff to do. You're getting new content coming out. You're getting all of those things, you know, like weapons coming out and stuff like that. And at no point are they ever trying to say, oh, hey, we're going to design this around trying to convince people to buy it, or we're trying to convince people to do this. It's just, if you want to play the game, you pay a subscription. And it makes sense to have things like, you know, like Netflix does, have a free trial at the beginning, have 30 days free at the beginning, or 2 weeks free or whatever. Occasionally have free weekends where people can play. Just do some things like that to let people try it out, to keep that population high by making it free at the point of beginning, and then say, okay, once you get past level 10, or once you've spent so many hours in the game, or after your first couple of weeks or whatever, now if you want to carry on doing it, you have to buy a subscription. They could even do things like, oh, it's free on the weekends, but if you want to play during the week, then you're going to pay a subscription, or stuff like that. There's lots of different ways of doing it, but it's something I haven't really seen a game take on yet. I haven't really seen games try this other than MMOs like World of Warcraft. But I think it could potentially work really well. Now, again, I don't think this would work in Game Pass because, you know, you need much more money to keep a PvP game running and alive than you do, I think, for something like a single player game where it's one and done. But I definitely think it could be something that maybe could, you know, be extras. And I think it's something a lot of people will invest heavily in one PvP game, so they might not mind paying for a subscription for it. You know, a lot of people just play Overwatch, or they just play Siege, or they just play Rocket League, or they just play Warzone. They don't tend to jump around between sort of 10 different games, although I know I do. But a lot of people don't do that. So I think more people might be prepared to do it if they could see the value in it, if they could see the quality of the games improving. So in conclusion, let's just summarize this, because this has been a very long ramble. I've been talking for over half an hour. Single player games, I think, should be full price single payments. Like, that should just be the standard, like it has been forever. Or if it's something that's maybe untested, unknown from a new developer, they should do a subscription model like Game Pass. They should be on some sort of subscription grouped up with other games, so it encourages creativity and innovation. PvE co-op games should use the expansion model like Destiny, should have massive groups of content put together, have a free-to-play element at the beginning, then have big blocks of content put together that you and your friends all buy that group of content, and then it encourages them to keep on making new groups of content, new interesting things, and you can just sort of pick and choose the things that you want to play. And then I think PvP games, so games like Warzone, should have a monthly subscription with free trials and free weekends, and, you know, a free period at the beginning and stuff like that. But in general, for the game moving forwards, you pay a subscription anytime you want to play it, and you can only play it while you've got that subscription running. And then everything else is included, so all of the cosmetics, all of the weapons, all of the new maps or whatever, all of that stuff is just part of the gameplay, so none of it affects it. Because everything I've been talking about today is about the idea that the games need to be paid for. Like, money has to go from the people playing the games to the people making the games. That's how that works. But you want to minimize the impact that has on game design. You want to minimize how much that affects the way people change the way their systems work in a way, change the way you actually interact with the game. You want to stop that from being about money as much as you possibly can. So those are my ideas for how to solve it. If you've watched all the way to the end of this video, thank you so much. It helps out my channel a massive amount. Now, if you want to help out even more, let me know your thoughts in the comments. What do you think about all of those different models? I'm very aware that the big problem with it is that a game like Destiny, which I keep talking about, is actually all three of these, that it's a single player game, and it's a PvE game, and it's a PvP game. So what are you going to do? Have paid expansions and a subscription and pay up front? I mean, that is basically what Destiny does, which makes it really difficult. I'd just get rid of the cosmetic microtransactions because I've kind of gone off them, to be honest.